Okay, we are at our time at 7:31. So usually there is a mute. Okay, I'm gonna I can't give you any more tech support from here, but I can probably direct message you as we go along. But I'd like to get us started. This is our start time, so I will start by welcoming everybody. I see people are still joining the webinar. Thank you for being here. I'm delighted that you've been able to make the time to come. The topic of addictions is obviously a topic of pressing concern for us, particularly here in BC. I have no expertise in the field myself. I'm just like everybody else. I care about people and I read the stats and I encounter folks in the course of life through our church and through personal relationships who are struggling with addictions. And I'm really delighted that Craig accepted my invitation to come and educate us. I was introduced to Craig by Jane Wakefield, who has experience in this area as well. And Craig is a practicing counselor for people with addictions and has direct experience and expertise and knowledge in this area, which I look forward to hearing. So thank you for being here, Craig. I see that we've had at least one land acknowledgement, and so I'm happy to acknowledge that this webinar is coming to you from the land of the Okanagan Syilx peoples. And I'm Chris Harwood-Jones. I'm the parish priest at All Saints Anglican Church in Vernon, British Columbia. So we are happy to host this. This is the, oh gosh, is it the third or the fourth webinar in our series now on topics of public concern. All of them have been excellent. If you didn't catch any of the previous ones, I upload all of them to YouTube after the fact so that they can be reviewed at your leisure. And similarly with this one, if you want to share this conversation with somebody you know, stay tuned. I guess, yeah, the parish website, allsaintsvernon.org, has a link for the speaker series. And after the speaker series has been conducted, after the particular lecture has happened, I change the link on that page. So if you click on it, it'll take you to the YouTube recording of the webinar. And for the upcoming one, it takes you to the Eventbrite page. So you will get the link if you're on our parish mailing list. If you're not on the parish mailing list, you can always go back to the parish website. Give me your day or two to get it up. And then the link will be linked through allsaintsvernon.org. And then you can refer that YouTube link to anybody else who wants to hear both the presentation as well as the Q&A. So this is the other part of my announcement, which is to say we are already recording this. I'm going to cut out some of the chatter before the talk, and I might cut out some of the chatter at the end. But apart from that, I will have a faithful representation of what happened at this seminar. I will be uploading it to YouTube. So please be aware that anything you say can and will be put on YouTube. So I will also keep a record of the chat. And when we come to the Q&A, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We will use that, and you can raise your hand. I can give you speaking permissions if you want to ask your question by voice. We're a small enough group that it should be fine just to have back and forth conversation. And we'll get to that after the presentation is done. So I'm going to type an answer to yes, but apparently not for you. I'll private message you shortly. And so I think I'm going to do that, and so you can see how the Q&A system works. So I think that's all that I have to say by way of introduction. So thank you, Craig, for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for the introduction. So I think what I'll do right now is I'll share the presentation. And my hope is that everyone is able to see the first slide there where it says addictions in our society today. Yeah, so again, thank you so much, Chris, for having me and really for the opportunity to be here, and thank you to everyone that's in attendance. I know for me, we do have to use Zoom a lot these days, but there is, it's a little bit to get used to and not be able to see everyone on in person. And so yeah, so thank you to everyone for being in attendance tonight, and really for me, having the opportunity to do this presentation. It's, I feel very, very grateful and really humbled to be able to provide some information. And I do think, in terms of kind of that dedication piece and really honoring, for me, I would, really like to honor and dedicate this presentation to, the individuals that are out there that are struggling right now with addiction. Also those individuals that are in recovery and who may be, seeking to be in recovery, as well as the individuals that are affected by addiction. It really is a family disease, and it affects so many individuals. And finally, really honoring, it's important for me to really honor all of the people that dedicate their lives to helping those individuals that are having challenges when it comes to addiction. So yeah, it's we have called this presentation challenges and hopeful developments, and really to kind of go through and to provide some information, in terms of what addiction is, what are some of the risk factors that may be involved in addiction, and really my intention is to talk more about the hope and the hopeful developments that are coming about, that really seek to assist anyone that is looking for help. So yeah, so we'll go through a number of PowerPoint slides, and then afterwards to give everyone the opportunity to ask questions. And yeah. So as Chris had mentioned, my name is Craig Renfrew. In terms of my designations or my certifications, I am designated through the Canadian College of Professional Counselors and Psychotherapists. And I am also a certified Indigenous addictions counselor. I have spent about the past 6 years working within residential treatment centers and treatment programs. I've worked in funded treatment centers, so publicly funded treatment centers, as well as private treatment centers. And I have also worked within the harm reduction and outreach field. Part of kind of my passion within addiction was to get involved in various sort of sides of recovery. I'm a firm believer that recovery is a very individual journey, and that there are many different ways and different means in terms of how people find recovery and what that looks like. Currently, I live in Vernon. I recently started a private practice, so doing one-on-one counseling, with really the focus being on addictions counseling and also recovery counseling. So working with individuals that are seeking to make changes in their life where they are challenged with substance use, and continuing to work with them and others with when they are in recovery, and the challenges that can come up in early recovery, and even in long-term recovery. And I also am a counselor for an intensive outpatient program that is offered here in Vernon. The one sort of other side of me is that I do have lived experience with addiction. I myself am a person in recovery from alcoholism. My addiction was really it started at about the age of 15 up until when I was 23 years old. And at 23, I attended a residential treatment program. Prior to that, addiction and alcohol really fueled my life. It was what I thought of essentially 24 hours a day. And when I made that decision to go into a residential treatment program, there was a lot of fear, a lot of unknowns, and really my hope is to sort of discuss that as well. I have been in recovery from alcohol for just over 15 and a half years, and for me, recovery has been very, very challenging, and that really to go back to sort of my passion around working with individuals and addiction is that there's a big part of me that takes that lived experience and those challenges that have come up in my own recovery, and really feeling that I can relate to a lot of the feelings, a lot of the emotions, a lot of the fear around what recovery is, what addiction is, and what life can look like outside of addiction. And lastly, my mentor really is Jane Wakefield, as Chris mentioned. She was the individual that spoke to me about coming and doing this, and for me, Jane is just a wonderful individual who is so honest and so real, and the what I have learned from Jane has been absolutely phenomenal. And I know Jane's here tonight, and I do have to give a shout out to her, because I appreciate everything that she has done for me and done for so many individuals in addiction and in recovery. So really, just in terms of kind of the intention of tonight, I am a person that I do my best to be intentional in a lot that I do, and I wanted to, get the most out of the information that I wanted to provide, and do my best to make it as real and also as factual as I could, with sort of intertwining my own sort of lived experience, as well as the experience I've gained from working with other individuals. One of the intentions is really to discuss addiction from a recovery standpoint, and not necessarily from a scientific point of view. There has been a tremendous amount of research and science done around addiction, and sort of the discoveries that have been made in terms of what is addiction, and we will touch on that. But for me, you know, I am definitely not an expert by any means in terms of that science. But I do think there are some key points that that are important to touch on. Secondly, is to provide context around addiction and also around recovery. And like I said before, you know, really looking at the hope and the possible solutions that for some of them, I do feel that they are starting to happen. And some of the solutions that, you know, as everyday people that we can also, you know, bring to the table in terms of that understanding and compassion. And lastly is the intention is to provide information tonight that is factual, as well as based on my own lived experience through addiction and through recovery, and also with the work that I've been so fortunate enough to work with individuals that are have challenges with substance use. So in terms of kind of painting a little bit of a picture, is that recently, about a month, maybe a month and a half ago, is that the BC Coroner's Department came out with the overdose death information. And I think that, you know, that is, it's very profound. And when I initially read it, it was very overwhelming to see the individuals that have overdosed and have died because of that. And I think that some of the main information that they have gathered for me can really give a bit of a perspective or a little bit of awareness as what some people may see as, you know, what does kind of call it a person that uses drugs, what does that sort of look like? And, you know, some of the information really, especially within this slide, may be a little overwhelming and may bring up some emotions. And, you know, going back to kind of the intent isn't to really to bring up those emotions, but more just use it as a means of, you know, creating awareness and really what I think is a big reality of the, you know, the profound impact that that really illegal drugs are having on BC and really on Vernon. Some of the stats recently that came out for November and December of last year is that in November there were 210 suspected overdose deaths, and in December of last year there was 215 suspected overdose deaths. And what they found were that these are the two largest numbers of suspected deaths ever recorded in a month in 2021. And this is just reflective of BC. In 2021, there was 2,224 suspected overdose deaths. That is, to me, that is 2,224 too many overdose deaths, and is really, yeah, I do get quite emotional when I look at that, you know, just because of the amount of the number of individuals that have died because of drugs. Again, in 2021, 56% of those 2,224 overdose deaths, those 56% of those occurred inside private residences. So what the coroner defines as a private residence is driveways, garages, trailer homes, and either the descendants, so the individual that passed away, their own residence or another's residence. So when I looked at that, what it showed to me is that there are a big percentage of individuals in terms of overdose deaths that are overdosing in that private residence. In 2021, 38% of the deaths were individuals that were 50 years of age or over, and 71% were aged 30 to 59. So when we look at that age category, is that, you know, there are a large percentage of that are individuals that are 50 years of age or over, and I do think that for many people that is quite surprising to see. A lot of people look at overdose deaths as that lower age category, you know, maybe 25 to 35, but when in fact it really it does go up, in, you know, 71% are 30 to 59. In 2018, they had published the same overdose death report, and with those stats is they did more of an in-depth findings in terms of looking at the demographics, looking at employment, and those types of things. And they haven't come out with that report for 2021, but I thought it was really important to look at what they found between 2016 and 17. Again, looking at, you know, where these overdose deaths occurred. Is that in 2016 and 17 is that 72% of those deaths happened living in a private residence. 13% happened living in social or supportive type of housing, and 9% were of the homeless population. Again, you know, for many people, this is quite surprising, with that private residence being such a high number. Again, with that report in 2016 to 17, is that what they found was that 44% of the individuals were employed at the time of the overdose. And what they also found was that approximately 4 in every 5 descendants were reported to have had contact with health services in the year prior to the overdose death. And really, you know, going back to kind of that perspective, it is that the reality is that if you look specifically at the overdose deaths, is that the majority of individuals that die due to overdose are individuals that are employed, or individuals that, you know, have a rent, that have a mortgage, that have families and have, you know, commitments, and that a lot of those individuals are using substances alone in their own residence. And I do think that as we sort of continue through the presentation, is for me that's important to sort of get out and create awareness around, because it does, to me, it does show that you know, addiction affects and can affect anyone. It's not just a specific vulnerable population that it affects. It really is affecting the homeless population, as well as the individuals that we may live next door to, the individuals that we may see on the weekends, that may be in our social circle. So it really, the impact of addiction is has really no boundaries. So when we look at sort of what is addiction, now this is really a big question with an even longer answer. So really, what I wanted to do was really hone in on a few sort of key key criteria with what is addiction, what does a addiction look like. Really, addiction is chronic and it's progressive. It's really a lifelong disease. In terms of the progressive nature, is that typically addiction will get worse over time, whether that's physically worse over time, emotionally, mentally. It is definitely progressive. And as we just spoke about on the last slide, is that there really, addiction really has no boundaries. It has the potential to affect it. Anyone, any age, any ethnicity. When looking at just sort of some definitions, the American Psychological Association, so the APA, they define addiction as a chronic disorder with biological, psychological, social, and environmental factors influencing its development and maintenance. And we are going to sort of look at those different areas in terms of what are some potential risk factors for individuals when it comes to addiction. The BC Ministry of Mental Health and Addiction, what they state addiction is when someone uses substances, changes can occur in their brain, making it challenging for them to stop using substances, especially if they don't have access to supports to reduce harm or begin their recovery. For me, the reason why I chose this one is because I think it touches on two really important areas. One is that it starts to touch on sort of that science, the changes that physically happen within the brain, which ultimately really it doesn't necessarily become about willpower or about that just making a decision of, I'm not going to use substances again. It's just, there's a lot more to it. And secondly is really that access to supports. And probably what you're going to find is that access to supports it is going to be a little bit of a theme as we continue to go through the presentation, and that's really one of the big, what I think is a hopeful development, but is also right now is quite a big barrier as well to individuals seeking recovery. Addiction can look like the inability to control consumption. You have an individual that may start to consume alcohol, and it really becomes very, very challenging to actually stop the consuming of the alcohol. You can look at substances as well. If somebody was using heroin, is that the individual would start to use heroin, and it would become very, very difficult to stop the use of that. it may look like continued use despite negative consequences. So as an example, if an individual had received a DWI, is that for many people that may prompt someone to stop using a particular substance because of that negative consequence. When it comes to addiction, is that sometimes even those severe penalties and consequences are not something that really stops someone from continuing to use. Cravings. So cravings are a really big thing in terms of addiction. When we look at cravings, what that could look like is really when an individual, the focus becomes solely on using a substance or on acquiring of getting that substance. It may be that overwhelming feeling of needing to use a substance. And really it can get into that sort of that psychological want to feel the effects of the substance, and a lot of the time those cravings become so much that essentially other areas of an individual's life sort of start falling down on priority, and it just becomes that overwhelming need to use and also to acquire substances. And then lastly, and again, this is not necessarily the 6 or 7 sort of this is what addiction is, but for me, a great deal of addiction has to do with what we call as a preoccupation. And what that means is that not only is there time spent in the physical use or using of a substance, is that a lot of time is used in terms of the kind of obsession, so the craving for it. A lot of time is taken up in terms of the planning, the planning to use and what day of the week to use, and then you get into the physical using, and then sort of the aftermath of the using is a lot of that guilt and shame around the use. So when you sort of look at the pre-planning, the planning, the physical using, and then that sort of guilt and shame is essentially it really does start to occupy for so many people, really like every kind of waking moment. It is that, and going back to a lot of priorities start to kind of come down that priority list, because it just becomes about the substance and when and where and how and all of that. So for many individuals that I work with, and including my own personal story, is that the preoccupation was a really big thing. For me, it really was. I would consume alcohol a few days a week, 2 or 3 days a week, but in reality, that preoccupation is that I thought about it basically all day, every day, and planned and all of that. So for me, that's actually probably one of the biggest things when it comes to the addiction. So I do want to touch on the risk factors that are associated with addiction. Now, this isn't necessarily to say that that if someone has the, one or a few of these kind of risk factors, is that they are in fact going to have substance use disorder. They are going to have addiction. These are a means of factors that can sort of potentially increase that risk to have addiction in one's life. One of the big things is the genetic predisposition, and essentially what that is that if addiction does run within the family, is that there does become quite a big percentage increase to be at risk for addiction. There has been a lot of studies, of research done. Some studies have shown that it potentially could be sort of a 50 to 60% higher risk factor to have addiction if addiction does run within the family. And we will sort of go into that in terms of sort of what someone can do to sort of support and a kind of hopeful development. Trauma is a huge risk factor in terms of addiction. When we look at intergenerational trauma as well, so trauma that may have been passed from generation to generation is also can be quite a big risk factor when it comes to addiction. In environmental, and really the environmental is that that it can be kind of more focused in terms of youth and growing up. So some of that environmental risk factor could look like peer pressure, could look like sort of community attitudes, or sort of access to substances. If there is an individual that grew up in a home where caregivers, parents, family members were using substances within the home, and there was that sort of easy access to it, is again that sort of adds to the risk factor. Poverty adds to the risk factor, and then that sort of instability at home. A lot of the times that sort of revolves around the family using substances and sort of that access to the substances. Mental health as well. Mental health. All of these risk factors are, in my opinion, very important. Is that mental health is another risk factor. As examples, it could be depression, it could be anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, bipolar disorder. For what a lot of the research is finding today is that a lot of the residential treatment centers are, in fact, they are, when you go there, is that not only are you looking at addiction, but you're also looking at mental health, and they are finding that they are getting better rates in terms of individuals being in recovery when they are able to look at those, what they would call co-occurring disorders. ACE, so that what that means is adverse childhood experiences. So some examples could look like abuse, witnessing violence within the home, could look like neglect, could look like loss of childhood basic needs, just as an example. So really that childhood does play an important role and can really have some of those big risk factors when it comes to addiction. And then when we look at dopamine, so this is sort of the I would say one of the few sort of sciencey parts of this presentation. And the reason I bring dopamine up is because there has been a lot of research that has been done on dopamine and how it really does affect addiction. And what dopamine is it's essentially it's a neurotransmitter, and it's strongly associated with that sort of pleasure and reward feeling. And what it does in terms of substances, and when you look at alcohol and, like it says here, other mood altering drugs, is that it somewhat artificially kind of creates that pleasure effect. And what they found is that when it comes to substances, is that effect on dopamine is that the substances actually increase dopamine a lot more efficiently and intensely. And what sort of happens with that is that over time, an individual that uses substances, is that you sort of have a kind of, like, if you want to call it a dopamine kind of threshold, is that when someone continues to use substances, is that dopamine sort of threshold gets increased and increased and increased. And what ends up happening is that over time, is that sort of pleasure, that reward feeling, it is only substances that allow that feeling to be felt. So really, all of the other enjoyment that an individual may feel in life, it doesn't quite get up to that point that has really been established by the substances itself. And so for some of you may have heard of the kind of like chasing that high, or sort of chasing that feeling, is that essentially that the dopamine has sort of has gone up so much that really nothing other than the substances are going to provide that pleasure feeling. And really, dopamine is also associated with the cravings. When challenges come up in life, when stress happens in life, is that an individual, in terms of addiction, will start to have cravings to not necessarily feel the feelings around the stress, around whatever might be happening in life, and they want to feel that pleasure center again. And so it becomes that an individual knows that really only substances are going to get an individual to feel that sort of pleasure feeling. And like I said, that really is, there is a documentary that is called Pleasure Unwoven. And that documentary, it is a fantastic video that really gets into looking at, what exactly dopamine does, and looks at glutamate and those types of things, and how it really affects the brain and affects addiction. And so if you are someone who really likes to learn more, really about kind of the science of addiction, is I would definitely highly recommend that. It's called Pleasure Unwoven. So we'll start sort of getting into kind of like what recovery looks like, and really in terms of sort of the model that I use, and many individuals that work within sort of the recovery field use, is really the Iceberg Model. And what it looks at is essentially the iceberg is the biggest part of the iceberg is really under the water. And sort of that top, sort of above the water part of the iceberg, is really what we call that 15%. which is really the substance use, so say that the physical using of the substance. And when individuals start to get into recovery, is that kind of the journey begins on the lower part of that iceberg, which we refer to as the 85%, which is really looking at the behaviors, the unhealthy behaviors, looking at, you know, the feelings, and starting to look at the experiences. As an example, it may be looking at the trauma, maybe looking at the grief and loss, maybe looking at the environment in which an individual grew up in. So when in early recovery, we start to refer it to, you know, working on the 85, as opposed to the 15, which is really that physical, the physical using. So when we look at sort of types of recovery, you know, what are the various types that someone might be looking at, is really, for me, there's sort of two core ones. One being a harm reduction model of recovery, and one being abstinence. Abstinence being the really eliminating the substance of choice for the individual, as well as really eliminating other substances that may have the potential for misuse. And then there is the harm reduction type of recovery. What harm reduction is it's essentially, as it says in this quote here, is really what it aims to do is it aims to reduce the harm that is related to substance use. Now, this may include reducing harms for the individual, but it also has to do with reducing harms for the community, for, you know, the overall healthcare system, and sort of the big difference between harm reduction and abstinence is that the harm reduction model isn't necessarily about stopping all use of substances. What some of you may be familiar with in terms of harm reduction, that and they do have these types of programs in place in Vernon, is they have the drug testing sites, they have the clean supplies, so for doing for injecting drugs. They have peer support programs for harm reduction. They have the supervised consumption sites as well. And just as an example, in terms of alcohol, what harm reduction may look like may be the sort of decreasing the amount of alcohol intake per week. So that really would reflect a harm reduction approach. So for recovery, and I will sort of just kind of go through these somewhat quickly, is that the pathway of recovery, like I mentioned sort of early on, is that it can look very different for different individuals. There really is no right or wrong way for what recovery might look like. There are detox programs that are available. Detox typically is a sort of short-term stay, so it could be, say, between a 3 and sort of 10-day stay, where an individual is monitored, is clinically monitored, to sort of withdrawal off of specific substances in a hospital type setting. They have residential treatment programs that both would be publicly funded or could be private as well. They have outpatient programs. So in Vernon, I do an intensive outpatient program, and that is really designed for individuals that can't necessarily go to a residential treatment program and stay somewhere for an extended period of time. So an outpatient program would really allow someone to continue, maybe it's work obligations or maybe it's family obligations, but they would still be able to take part in a recovery program. They have aftercare groups, which will go through supportive recovery houses. So that may look like someone goes into a treatment program, leaves that treatment program, and comes into a supportive house where the individuals that are staying there are all in recovery, really, you know, a safe place to be. There's counseling, and then there are also some pharmaceuticals, and I put adjunct there as just meaning that a lot of the times in terms of pharmaceuticals is that those you sort of add the pharmaceuticals into some of the other pathways above. In terms of the pharmaceuticals, one of the well-known ones is the methadone clinics that they do have here in Vernon and throughout the Okanagan. And for a lot of people, those methadone clinics, they don't necessarily know that those clinics are, for the most part, covered under a lot of the healthcare plans. So that would be something that they would be able to attend and to get involved in. That would be covered, so there wouldn't be any additional fee to that. So some of the barriers, and I do think that this is really important to touch on, because there are definitely barriers to starting recovery as well as really continuing in recovery. When we look at starting recovery, some of the barriers that we can look at is, I do think that sort of the first one is, in a lot of cases, is that denial, is that an individual may not necessarily see that the addiction is causing those negative consequences, may not feel that they need to make changes in their life. For me, I do believe that denial is really closely associated with fear. That shame and guilt, you know, the shame and guilt can be so profound with an individual that is struggling with addiction. You know, looking at the shame and guilt is, again, sort of that being intertwined is, you know, a lot of that can be fear as well. I know in my own personal journey, it really was, for me, it was about that fear of losing the relationship with the substance. You know, I had created a life where that relationship that I had was something that at the time I could rely on. You know, I knew it was there. I knew that it, you know, wasn't going to talk back to me. You know, it was, and really trying to imagine life without that relationship of the substance was really challenging for me, and I do see it as being a big barrier for a lot of people. Availability of resources. So again, sort of looking at that theme, is that's a big theme, is sort of the wait list to get into some of the resources. Financial, if you're looking at, you know, private treatment, is that there can be an enormous cost to it. Isolation, you know, when we looked at those overdose stats, is really the isolation in individuals that are, the reality is that individuals are using alone and feeling alone, and some of that really is sort of the stigma, which we'll cover on the next slide. Another barrier may be sort of self-referral versus doctor referral. So some treatment programs, you have to have a doctor referral, and again, that's sort of like a time thing, you know, in terms of a wait list, in terms of, you know, booking a doctor's appointment and getting them to fill out information. And proximity to help. So it may be individuals that aren't close to a treatment center, to a detox location. And it's just their actual location that can be a barrier. And then untreated mental health concerns, when we look at depression, when we look at anxiety and those types of mental health concerns, is that definitely can be a barrier. Continuing recovery, some of the barriers, I think one of the biggest ones is stress. Stress really is the sort of number one relapse feeling. So stress can definitely be a big barrier to continuing recovery. The availability of continuous resources. So again, whether it's finding that supportive housing long-term, whether it's the wait list. Stopping recovery when things are going well. You know, kind of that feeling of complacency of, you know, if things are going really good in recovery, is that, you know, sometimes the challenge becomes continuing to do those recovery things. The ability to cope with life's challenges in healthy ways. A lot of treatment programs and counselors, you know, that's a big part of recovery counseling, is really working with individuals to be able to cope with the challenges that come up in everyday life, whether it's bills, whether it's, you know, those life stressors, relationships, family, employment, you know, and really having what we refer to as, you know, having the tools in the toolbox to get through those. So when we look at sort of problems and challenges, again, with keeping with the theme, is one of the biggest challenges is access to the actual resources. So that's really whether it's wait times or whether it's a financial thing, having the financial means to attend a private residential treatment program, because that, you know, there's an opening there, versus maybe a funded location that there's a longer wait time for. Stigma is and continues to be a very, very big challenge. Whether it's, you know, the kind of like idea of, you know, where that really it's all about willpower. You know, it's kind of that theme or that attitude of, you know, why can't you just stop? You know, it can't be that hard. You know, look at all the negative consequences that are happening. You know, why can't you just see that, you know, you need to make changes? Is really that's the reinforcement of that stigma, because it is, you know, at the end of the day, it is so much more than just the willpower and just that, you know, decision to, I'm just going to stop doing it. There's a lot more that is involved in it. Complacency. So again, you know, it's like we spoke about on the last slide, is, you know, when things are going well, the challenge can become, you know, continuing to be in recovery, continuing to do the things that that you need to do to stay well. Another challenge can be that ongoing, that consistent support. And really that can sort of intertwine with the next one, which is that sometimes the system can really become complex. There can be a lot of different resources that can kind of seem sort of overwhelming, a little bit all over the place. It may be, having to go to your doctor for one thing and your counselor for another thing, and a support group and a aftercare group, and so it can become that overwhelming feeling. One of the big things that I think is hopeful is really getting into that sort of wraparound service where you have organizations that can really that can really provide everything sort of all in one place, is sort of like a one-stop shop type thing. Relapse can be very, very challenging. One of the things in terms of relapse is that, yes, it definitely can happen. Individuals can relapse and go back to using, and it's really important for it to kind of go back to the basics, to go back to the tools that that individuals learn in early recovery. And cross addiction. So really what cross addiction is that someone may stop using one substance and may start using a different substance. So what I know for me personally, and what I have spoken to quite a few individuals about in terms of that cross addiction, is that they may quit their substance of choice and they're in recovery, and sugar can be a huge sort of cross addiction. Again, me personally, is that it's still, for me, it's still a big challenge today. It is just the sugar is just that kind of quick, sort of feel good. And some people may, they may stop using alcohol, but they may start using marijuana instead. And in those cases, it can be really challenging to sort of maintain that, and to not go back to essentially that sort of drug of choice. So kind of and I want to kind of honor the time, and I know that we're sort of getting close, so I will sort of I will do my best to sort of quickly go through this, but also some of this is really important to cover. So in terms of kind of what are those keys to recovery, what have I found that really help have solid recovery. I'm a firm believer that recovery is it's quality, not necessarily quantity. I know in my own recovery is that I have, regardless of sort of the amount that I've had, I have gone through many bouts of challenging recovery. So that's why I say, it's really the quality of recovery is what really matters. And really in terms of the keys to that, is one is an aftercare plan, and following an aftercare plan, that really keeps an individual accountable, and responsible to develop what their recovery is going to look like themselves, which in turn really holds someone accountable for really following through. And I think this is the biggest one. I think if there's sort of a takeaway from any of this, it really is connection, and being able to relate. You have peer support groups and community support groups. So you have AA programs, you have the NA programs, the CA programs. There are many different types of recovery support groups. And And it really is that connection, that being able to relate, that is so key in recovery. One example that I often use is that I have an amazing family, and one of sort of my biggest supporters is in fact my sister, and really when it and in early recovery, if I was having a really tough day, and all I could think about was really using substances, as much as I wanted to, the reality is that, I couldn't reach out to my sister and say, hey, I'm having a really bad day and all I want to do is drink, because she would essentially freak out. She would get worried. She would call me, she would text me, I know that that's, just out of her love and concern. But on the other side of that is that I could really go to anyone in sort of my recovery circle and I could say to them, hey, look, I really want to drink today. And they would look at me and say, I get it. I can relate. And so that's really for me and for recovery, it's just that connection and really being able to relate is so important I would say in early recovery, but recovery sort of throughout life, it's so important. A personal belief system, it can be a really big key, regardless of what that sort of belief system is. Ongoing counseling can be very, very important, whether that's sort of recovery specific, whether that's, mental health counseling, whether that's continuing to do trauma counseling, whatever that specific area may be, is that really continuing to do that. Continuing medical checkups, or continuing to see your doctor, to be letting your doctor know that, I'm a person in recovery. If stuff comes up in recovery, as an example, there's challenges sleeping, is that, if your doctor knows that you're in recovery, then they're probably not going to prescribe you sleeping medication that potentially could be very addictive in nature. Balance. So really balance in life, and really looking at it from mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, is that balance is a really key ingredient. Fun. So this in early recovery, this can be very, very challenging, is to find fun. And really, I think a lot of the fun initially starts with just sort of being good to self, and being nice to self. Is that it can take quite a while to start having fun in other areas of your life, and really it does start with that sort of self-care, that self-love, and family involvement. This really is a family disease, and really having that family involvement can be a huge piece of recovery. For me, I have 4 kids, and my youngest is 10, and she is involved in my recovery. She doesn't need to know the specifics, but she knows that I don't use alcohol, that I'm in recovery. We have these great conversations about addiction at a kind of 10-year-old level, and but again, it's kind of the more people that are involved in your recovery, the more supports that you have. So I'll skip this one. So in terms of kind of improvements and solutions, to sort of wrap up, these are sort of what I really feel could make a huge difference, is really public information to community and professionals, much like we're doing tonight, is really, you know, raising that awareness, really having those conversations, those, you know, those real conversations about what addiction looks like, and you know, what are some of the things that can be done, the resources that are there. Long-term supportive recovery housing. I am a huge believer in that long-term housing. I think that's probably one thing that that Vernon really lacks, and one area that I wish more than anything that there was a housing in Vernon that really supported individuals that either come out of a residential treatment center, or that come out of an outpatient program, and having that safe place to start recovery. You know, there can be in residential treatment centers, there, you know, they can feel sort of relatively safe when you're there, and the tendency is that when you leave a residential treatment center, is that life can hit, and reality can hit very, very fast. And so yeah, I'm a huge supporter of recovery housing, and I really do hope one day that Vernon is able to offer something like that. More emphasis on sort of that transition between someone may make a decision that they want to make changes, they want to get help, and there's that wait list. So really in between, yes, I want to get help. However, there's a 9-week wait list to get into treatment. I think that really there needs to be more emphasis within those two sort of areas. I talked to a colleague last week in Kelowna, and he let me know that's one of the things that they're actually doing at the organization he works at, is really funding and putting a lot of planning and effort into that transition, which for me is very exciting, because again, when looking at sort of the barrier, the wait list is a huge barrier. So having supports in that transition, I do believe can really keep people motivated to continue that journey going into treatment. I think a lot more education in terms of educating the youth. You know, we do a few substance use classes within the school system here in Vernon, and you know, I would love nothing more than to make that part of the curriculum. You know, when you look at youth, and you look at, you know, that sort of genetic predisposition that for that risk factor, you know, is really being able to talk to youth about that, you know, and educating them in terms of you know, making good decisions around substances, and you know, and really letting them know what resources are available. A big thing that you know, probably the majority of people would agree with is that, you know, really getting more funds into treatment centers, which in turn creates more beds, more availability, less wait times. Peer support workers. I do know that in terms of interior health, is that they are working really hard to start doing this more, is just having people working for the health authority that can relate, that are in recovery, that offer that relatability, that offer that support of knowing you know, what it's like and how challenging that it can be. Again, something like that, to hear that, they're looking at doing more to that is really exciting to hear about. And then really the quicker access to treatment options, much like the, more funds going to treatment equals more beds. The reality is that some funded treatment centers in the Okanagan, they can, if you want to see kind of at a minimum, is sort of like a 9-10 weeks. At a sort of on the long end of it, it could take 3 months to get into a treatment center. In terms of what can be done, I wish I had the answer, but that's just sort of the reality, and that's a lot of people really do get sort of lost in that wait list, and it's really unfortunate. So to kind of to close here is really, what can everyone do? One of the big things is really the conversations. If there's someone in your life, it is kind of, having that conversation in terms of, what does, if that person's struggling with addiction, what do they need? What could you do to help support them? Is really coming at it from a compassionate view, not necessarily threats. Is that kind of leads me into the next. Is really like healthy boundaries are really important. Is establishing those healthy boundaries, letting that individual know that you're there to support, but you're not there to enable. You're not there to say finance their substance use. One of the big things is to reach out individually, for your own support and your own help. And really, taking care of self, establishing healthy expectations of the individual's change. When it comes to addiction, is that as much as probably many of us want, is that change does not happen overnight. I do think that really working on self really helps to work on those kind of expectations and patience, and that honesty is a big one in terms of letting that other person know how addiction is affecting you, how it's affecting your relationship with them, in terms of that honesty and having that compassion through healthy boundaries. Is that at the end of the day, I do believe that builds trust, and trust goes a long ways in terms of when someone is ready, that they can rely on that person that they trust to help them. And like we mentioned in the last slide, is really the talking to youth about it, creating that awareness. I really think that the reality, the honesty, talking to youth about the overdose deaths, as hard as that is very, very important, and does allow the youth to see the progressive nature of addiction. These really are in terms of resources available. What I might do is I may just send this slide specifically to Chris, and then if there's if anyone wants to get this list, then maybe Chris could send it out. These are really just all of the resources that are available sort of in Vernon or nearby. And really, finally, this is what I tell a lot of clients that I work with, is in terms of recovery, is that I'm not telling you it is going to be easy. I'm telling you, it's going to be worth it. Recovery is and can be very, very challenging, but the rewards are just absolutely worth it. So so that really is my presentation. I sincerely apologize for probably going over. When I start talking about this, it's just, yeah, you probably could, I could probably talk until tomorrow morning at about 10 a.m. on this. So I really, I appreciate everyone for being here and taking the time. And yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Craig. Really appreciate it. We're almost out of time, so I'm just going to ask if anybody wants to have a question or a comment. You can throw something in the chat. You can throw a question in the Q&A panel, or you can raise your hand using the little raise hand button. And have a couple final thoughts here. So it's 10 more minutes before we're going to call it off. I see somebody's got their hand up. That's Elaine. Okay, Elaine, I'm going to turn you on. And I'm going to ask you to unmute. So, okay, go ahead, Elaine.
Can you hear me?
We can, yes, go ahead.
Okay. I was interested in the children, the ACE, the ACE, that when children see abuse or witness violence, neglect, or loss of basic needs. I was just wondering what the A, I can see the C stands for children, but the A and the E.
Okay. Yeah. So the ACE is adverse childhood experiences.
Yes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great, thanks, Elaine. Any other comments or questions? I see Stuart. I'm okay. Go ahead, Stuart. We can't hear you yet. You don't seem to be muted, but double check your microphone is working correctly. Okay, we're going to let Stuart work on his microphone issues. Anybody else? Okay, I have a question, Craig. While Stuart is figuring out what's going on with his microphone, I always wonder about big picture sociological perspective stuff about addictions, and from that perspective, addictions are not just an individual issue. I mean, certainly they affect families, but the rise in addictions, which seems to be certainly a trend here in BC, suggests to me that it's a cultural issue as much as it is. It's not just an individual choice. There are more factors. There are more things going on about all of us that that makes the chart go up. Do you have any thoughts about what that is? What's going on? What's not going on? What has changed? What is changing?
I think for me, it's sort of two things. I think that on one sort of side of that, I do think that in terms of of youth and sort of growing up, is that I think that the peer pressure, and the somewhat kind of like normalcy of, say, alcohol and, say, marijuana is becoming, is that I do feel that, in a sense, is that it's somewhat abnormal to have youth that are not using substances, as opposed to kind of the opposite. I also think that as sort of a society, is that I feel that and I speak personally as well, is that we need to do a better job of having conversations about how we're actually feeling.
Mm.
You know, as opposed to the, you know, I'm good, I'm bad, I'm okay. It is that I really think that, you know, if we can really start, you know, talking about, and this may be really cliche and maybe something that maybe every counselor would say, but I do think that, you know, if we are able to kind of just dig a little bit deeper, and just have, you know, more connected and meaningful conversations, is that we can really start to get to know, you know, people much better.
Great, thanks. I see Elaine has her hand up again. So go ahead, Elaine.
On that conversation, basically, what we have been concerned about is the peer pressure and vaping that is a new thing, really, in many of our lives. So I think that the kids have been duped here with the idea that vaping is somehow not as harmful as cigarettes. And so what we found at one of our schools in Vernon is that vaping became a thing, and our own grandson was found vaping, much to our consternation. And then, you know, then there was other things that the peer group seemed to really get into. For one thing I heard about, but I'm not sure whether our guy was into it, was things like very strong alcohol mixed with high caffeine drinks. So these are a couple of things that are new, as you know, as well as, I don't know what's going on with Mary Jane or weed, that used to be prevalent when I was young. But I think going back to vaping, the advertising and so on and so forth, that then ends up harming our youth, because apparently it harms the lungs, and it harms the obviously the brain, a developing brain. That's another issue with marijuana, that if kids get involved in that as teens, especially young boys, or not young boys, but, you know, teenage boys, their brains suffer in their development. So to me, it's you know, how on earth did the vaping get going and be allowed to be advertised as much as it was? So that's what I'm concerned about, is that from the governmental level, you know, you remember how long it took before cigarettes were banned in terms of advertising. I mean, I'm old enough to know, you know, old enough to remember, I should say, when cigarettes were on every great big billboard here in North America. So you also can probably tell from my accent that I grew up in a pub. As a teenager. That's where we went.
Yeah.
We drove our little fast cars all the way into the country to the pub that wouldn't, you know, be noticed by the police. And I come from a background of, you know, where alcohol was just the norm. And nobody really bothered about ID in those days. So that shows how old I am. But there you go. A couple of things.
Yeah.
Thanks, Elaine. Any thoughts on that, Craig?
You know, in terms of, you know, of vaping, yeah, you know, I for youth, is I do feel that has sort of become the norm, you know, and when I do speak to some of the students, you know, about within the sort of substance use educational classes is a lot of the times I will, with it, honesty is just ask them, you know, why are you doing it? You know, is it in terms of peer pressure? Is it in terms of you know, that feeling of wanting to fit in? Is that feeling of you know, I don't want to be, say, the only person that doesn't do it, and really for me to kind of understand the why, and really the deeper kind of meaning, I think, you know, really starts to open up the conversation, and really look at, you know, I do believe that there are, you know, youth can have such a really positive influence on one another when, you know, they start to open up and be honest, and look at, you know, the whys as opposed to maybe the why nots.
Okay, we're running a little over time, but I'm going to let Jane Wakefield have a word here. So go ahead, Jane.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you fine. Go ahead.
Okay, Craig, thank you. You did a great job. I just have to say that, and I won't talk about my theory about the whole world and addiction, but but thank you very much. You did a great job.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jane.
Thanks.
Okay, and that brings our evening to a close. Thank you for being here. I'm going to, like I said, upload this to YouTube as soon as I can. It's a very busy week for me, so I will do that when I get to it. And then just keep an eye on our parish website, and it'll show up there in a few days. So this brings this evening to a close. Thanks again to Craig for being here and for sharing your experience with us. It was great. Lots to think about, lots to chew on. Everybody else, please tune in next month. We've got, let me pull up my calendar here. Our next speaker, I have to make it big so my old eyes can see it. My next speaker is on March the 22nd, same time. It's a Tuesday night, just like this. It's my friend Rachel Zubik from the Community Policing Association, and she's going to be talking about raising children in an online world. So with a particular emphasis on parents or grandparents or anybody that is concerned about what it means to raise kids when so much stuff is online and online is so unregulated. She does this work with schools, and I've invited her to be part of our series as well. So looking forward to that one as well. And that's it. So thank you. God bless, and take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.